Thank you very much. I'd like to congratulate Schengen, IFPRI, and the report team on the release of an impressive report. The 2012 Global Food Policy Report chronicles the developments in a year of drought and food price variability. It also documents the fruits of 5+ years of international focus on agriculture and increased public and private sector investment, partly as a result of higher prices and hence incentives. The report lays out the challenges, and as Schengen says in the overdue chapter in his presentation, there's a mixed record on walking the talk. I'm very pleased that ERS has contributed research findings on global agricultural productivity in a collaboration between Keith Fugly and Alejandro Nin-Pratt. Jean Busby from ERS also provides an update on consumer food waste. So we're really pleased to be part of this excellent report. In my comments, I'm going to focus on agricultural productivity, which is a topic of strong mutual interest between our two institutions. The report draws together new work from both IFPRI and ERS on trends and development in international agricultural productivity that challenged conventional wisdom that growth in agricultural productivity had been slowing down. Now, while we do observe some slowing down that may be true for yield growth or certain major cereal grains, and maybe for some OECD countries, for the world as a whole, both IFPRI and ERS research find that total factor productivity growth has not slowed, but in fact has accelerated in the past couple decades. Importantly, the global trend is increasingly being driven by productivity performance in developing countries, as was highlighted in Schengen's presentation, where it has been influenced by long-term capacity building and agricultural R&D, as well as efficiency gains from shifting more agricultural resources to the production of higher valued commodities. This in response to higher incomes and growing consumer demand for food diversification. The report also describes the positive impact that future productivity growth in agriculture can have on improving food security in poor countries. However, and this final scenarios really, I think, highlight that potential benefit. However, productivity is not manna from heaven. It really needs to be the result of deliberate policy choices, especially regarding investment in research and development. I want to turn and say a few things now about sub-Saharan Africa, where despite the general congruence of IFPRI and ERS estimates on the trends in global agricultural productivity growth, we have some disagreement on what's going on in sub-Saharan Africa. And in my mind, disagreements are a good cause for more research and more work that I think we would both agree needs to be done. I think this difference is fairly understandable given the generally poor and incomplete quality of data for sub-Saharan Africa. So just where do we disagree and agree? Well, we both agree that output growth in sub-Saharan Africa has accelerated to around 3 to 3.5% annually in the past decade. The disagreement is on the sources of growth, where IFPRI attributes this more to growth in total factor productivity, where the work at ERS finds that increased resource use plays a much larger role in explaining this growth in output. And why do we get to these different points? Well, one source is how we measure land and labor inputs, where at ERS we assume slightly higher growth in these use of inputs. And if you zero in on the sources of the difference, a lot hinges on Nigeria, which accounts for about a quarter of sub-Saharan Africa product agriculture, and where data is particularly problematic. So again, there's a real room for a research agenda that we can work on together. However, despite these differences, we agree that there's been an improvement in growth in sub-Saharan Africa since the mid-'80s, turning from zero or negative to a positive trend. And we both see that improved policies and a gradual diffusion of improved technologies appear to explain this turnaround. say a few words about our research agenda. Better understanding the drivers of productivity in Africa is a topic that we can both work on together. And I also think it points to the importance in investing in agricultural data so that we have evidence from on the ground as to what's taking place in these countries, that it can explain and nuance the investments so they can be better targeted in the long run. I think there's also a research agenda for both our institutions in understanding how public and private sector investments and their interactions lead to productivity growth. Research is needed to understand the role of research institutions and how they're organized, including the relative benefits from national, regional, and international networks. A recent report by Keith Fugly and Nick Rada from ERS estimated that in looking at African productivity, doubling international research would lead to a productivity increase of 4.1%, and national research spending doubling would lead to 3.4%. So there's some spillovers that show a larger impact from investing in international research, but also complementarities. And both these effects are after 2 decades of the research investments. The IFPRI policy report also covers the role of natural resources and their sustainability, and I think this really needs to be considered in evaluating long-term productivity, where changes in climate place a premium on resource quality and availability. Let me say a few words now about a chapter I found very interesting, and by not covering every chapter, it's not that they aren't valuable, I just focused on a few, and I found the chapter on employment and agriculture provided much food for thought on an issue where on the surface you would think there's little in common between the U.S., with 1% of our population in agriculture farming, and the rest of in the developing world where 50% or more of the population can be engaged in farming. However, even in the U.S., there's a lot of interest in the employment effects of agriculture and the potential to create jobs for youth in rural areas and engage those youth in the future of farming. The findings in this report really sync with what we've found, that agriculture doesn't just provide direct farming jobs, but that farmers themselves create off-farm jobs and engage as entrepreneurs in creating lively rural communities. So it was surprising to me to see how much in common our research agenda and finding has here. And I found that the chapter gave me much food for thought. One thing I would like to add is that it's interesting and a conundrum to me that if you think about research and innovation, which makes agriculture dynamic and attractive to our youth, it's inevitably associated with being more capital intensive and labor saving. So I think there's an open option about how we do make these investments, which will have productivity gains, also link them to the issues of labor and jobs in rural economies. It's a research agenda that I think we'll be both working on in different dimensions. Let me close by saying that one can always want more from a report, and this gives a lot, but I have a couple comments that can be seen as possible topics for 2013 and are even foreshadowed in your outlook for 2013. One is on consumption. The report discusses the importance of consumption, but the actual chapters just focus on productivity, producer policies, and other topics that are largely related to the supply side. I would have liked to see more on research on nutrition and health, but again, it looks like you're already thinking about this as a topic for the 2013 report. Also, in reading the entire report, I didn't always find a consistent story about the role of prices. And as an economist, high or low prices are neither bad nor good, but they do have distributional consequences, and it depends on where you sit in the market, whether you want to see prices high or low. And I think that there could be more work done in looking at the role of prices and their distributional effects in thinking about policy options for developing countries and their role of incentives for farmers, input companies, and the government to invest in the sector. In closing, thanks for the opportunity to have an early copy of the report. I enjoyed reading it and I recommend it very highly to everyone.